My best friend's husband crossed the line, and it awakened something in me. Before we begin, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these real-life stories. And if this resonates with you, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything. Now let's get into what happened that night. My name is Catherine, and at 40 years old, I thought I had myself completely figured out. I'd been married once in my 20s, divorced by 30, and had spent the last decade building a life I was proud of. A successful career in marketing, a beautiful apartment in the city, a close circle of friends, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you want from life. I wasn't looking for drama. I wasn't looking for complications. I certainly wasn't looking for the kind of awakening that would turn my entire understanding of myself upside down. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it, and sometimes those surprises come from the most unlikely sources. Jennifer Chen had been my best friend for 15 years. We met when we were both 25, working at the same advertising agency, bonding over terrible office coffee and even worse client demands. Over the years, we'd been through everything together. My divorce, her mother's illness, career changes, cross-country moves, the messy, complicated journey of navigating life as adult women trying to figure out who we were and what we wanted. Jen was more than a friend. She was family, the sister I'd chosen, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. And because of that trust, because of that bond, I'd built walls around certain thoughts, certain feelings, certain possibilities that should never be explored. One of those walls was built firmly around her husband. David Mitchell had been part of Jen's life for 10 years, married for 8 of those. I was at their wedding, gave a speech at their reception, watched them build a life together that seemed solid and good. David was an architect, the kind of person who thought in structures and systems, who approached life with the same precision he brought to his buildings. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of looks that improved with age rather than faded. At 43, he had silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that made him look thoughtful rather than old, and a quiet intensity that some women probably found attractive. But I'd never been one of those women. To me, David was simply Jen's husband, a peripheral figure in my world. Someone I saw at dinners and parties, exchanged pleasantries with, and never thought about beyond those contexts. He existed in a category so separate from any romantic possibility that attraction wasn't just inappropriate, it was impossible. Or at least, I thought it was impossible. I thought I knew myself well enough to be certain that some lines would never blur, some boundaries would never be tested. I was wrong. The night everything changed started like any other evening I'd spent at their house. Jen had invited me over for dinner, nothing formal, just the 3 of us catching up over wine and pasta. It was a Thursday in November, cold enough that Jen had a fire going in their living room, warm enough inside that I'd shed my coat and settled into their comfortable couch with a glass of red wine. We talked about work, about Jen's latest project at the hospital where she worked as an administrator, about my frustrations with a difficult client. David was there but quiet, the way he usually was during our conversations, occasionally adding a comment, but mostly letting Jen and me dominate the discussion. This was our normal dynamic. Jen and I would talk, David would listen, and everyone was comfortable with their role. But about an hour into the evening, Jen's phone rang. It was the hospital, an emergency situation that required her immediate attention. Some crisis with a patient's insurance that only she could resolve because she'd been handling the case personally. She looked genuinely torn, apologizing profusely, asking if we could reschedule. But David waved her off, told her to go handle the emergency, that I could stay and finish my wine if I wanted. And I should have left right then, should have gathered my things and walked out the door with Jen, should have recognized that being alone with David felt different in a way I couldn't name but should have heeded. But it seemed ridiculous to rush out just because Jen had to leave. We were adults. I'd been in David's presence hundreds of times. There was no reason to treat this situation as dangerous. So I stayed. Jen left in a flurry of apologies and promises to make it up to me. The door closed behind her. And suddenly the house felt different, quieter, more intimate. David and I had never been alone together for more than a few minutes. In 10 years of knowing him, we'd never had a real conversation, just the 2 of us. He'd always been Jen's husband, never David the individual. And I realized, sitting there in their living room with the fire crackling and my wine glass in hand, that I knew almost nothing about him beyond the basics. I didn't know what he thought about, what he dreamed about, what made him laugh, or what kept him awake at night. He was a stranger I'd known for a decade, and that stranger was now looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the polite smile he usually wore at social gatherings. Something else. Something focused and intense and slightly unsettling. David refilled both our wine glasses without asking, then sat down on the couch, not next to me exactly, but closer than he would have sat if Jen were there. Close enough that I was aware of the space between us in a way I'd never been before. We made small talk for a few minutes. Safe topics. The weather, a movie that had just come out, some mutual friends. But there was tension under the pleasantries. A charge in the air that made every word feel weighted with meaning beyond the actual conversation. And then David said something that shifted everything. He asked me if I was happy. Just like that. A simple question that felt anything but simple in the way he was looking at me when he asked it. I laughed it off, said of course I was happy. Why would he ask that? But David didn't laugh. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding mine, and said he'd been watching me for years, watching me at dinners and parties and gatherings, and he'd noticed that I always seemed to be performing, playing a role, being the person everyone expected me to be rather than whoever I actually was underneath all that performance. He said it looked exhausting, and he wondered if I ever let anyone see the real Catherine, or if I'd gotten so good at the performance that I'd forgotten there was someone real underneath. The observation cut deeper than it should have, because he was right. At 40, I'd spent so much of my life being the responsible one, the reliable friend, the woman who had her act together, that I'd stopped asking myself who I actually was when no one was watching. I'd built this careful, controlled life where everything was managed and safe and predictable, where I never took risks that might lead to messiness or complication or pain. And I'd told myself this was wisdom, maturity, the natural progression of becoming a grown woman who knew better than to chase things that would only lead to disaster. But sitting there with David's words hanging in the air, I wondered if maybe it was just cowardice. If maybe I'd been hiding rather than growing, playing it safe rather than living fully. And that realization, that crack in my carefully constructed self-image, made me vulnerable in a way I hadn't been in years. David must have seen something shift in my expression because he moved closer. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift that closed the space between us by a few inches. But those inches felt significant, felt like a line being approached even if not crossed yet. And then he said something that changed everything. He said he'd always wondered what I would be like if I stopped being so careful, if I let myself want something just because I wanted it, not because it was appropriate or safe or the right thing. He said there was fire underneath all my control, and he could see it even if I'd gotten good at hiding it. And he wanted to know what it would take to let that fire out, what it would feel like to stop performing and just be. What Catherine would be like if she gave herself permission to feel things she'd been denying for years. His voice had dropped lower as he spoke, intimate and intense in a way that made my heart race. And when I tried to respond, tried to deflect or change the subject, or do anything to diffuse the tension, I found I couldn't speak, couldn't form words, could only sit there staring at him while something inside me that had been dormant for so long began to stir, to wake up. To demand attention I'd never given it permission to demand. David reached out slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stand up, to leave. His hand came to rest on my knee, a touch that could have been friendly, could have been innocent, except for the way he was looking at me when he did it. Looking at me like he could see straight through all my defenses to something raw and real underneath, like he knew exactly what he was awakening in me and was doing it deliberately. And God help me, I didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't do any of the things I should have done. I just sat there, frozen, while his hand stayed on my knee and his eyes stayed locked on mine, and something inside me cracked wide open. The touch sent electricity through my entire body, made my breath catch, made me aware of every nerve ending, every heartbeat, every sensation I'd been carefully not feeling for years. It wasn't just attraction, though attraction was definitely part of it. It was recognition, Like David had reached inside me and found a part of myself I'd been hiding from even myself. A part that wanted, that needed, that craved intensity and passion and the feeling of being truly seen by someone who wasn't afraid of what they saw. I'd spent a decade dating nice, appropriate men who fit into my careful life. Men who never challenged me or pushed me or made me feel anything too intense. And I'd told myself that was maturity, that the wild, passionate feelings of youth were supposed to fade into something calmer and more sustainable. But sitting there with David's hand on my knee and his eyes boring into mine, I realized I'd been lying to myself. I hadn't matured past wanting intensity. I'd just gotten really good at suppressing it, at pretending I didn't need fire because fire was dangerous and I'd decided safety was more important. But the thing about suppressed desires is that they don't actually go away. They just go underground, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right circumstances to burst back to the surface. And David, with his quiet intensity and his too perceptive observations and his deliberate crossing of lines, had found the key to unlocking something I'd kept buried for so long, I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. He leaned in closer, his face inches from mine now, and asked if I felt it, if I felt the charge between us, if I felt something inside me responding to him in ways I probably didn't want to acknowledge. And I should have lied, should have said no, should have laughed it off. Should have done anything except tell him the truth. But the truth came out anyway, barely a whisper, an admission that felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I was. I told him yes. Yes. I felt it. Yes. Something inside me was responding. Yes, I was terrified of what that meant. David's hand moved from my knee to my face, his fingers tracing my jawline with a gentleness that somehow made the touch even more devastating. And he told me that I didn't have to be terrified. That wanting things wasn't wrong, feeling things wasn't wrong, letting myself be real wasn't wrong. That the only wrong thing was spending my whole life pretending to be someone I wasn't just because being real felt too dangerous. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and the sensation was so intense I actually gasped. A 40-year-old woman gasping like a teenager at a simple touch. But it didn't feel simple. It felt monumental. Like every nerve in my body had suddenly woken up after years of being dormant. Like I'd been living my life in black and white and someone had just turned on the color. And the most terrifying part was that I wanted more. Wanted him to keep touching me. Wanted to lean into this feeling instead of running from it. Wanted to be the version of myself that he seemed to see, even though I'd spent years hiding her away. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. His hand on my face. His eyes locked on mine, both of us breathing too fast, both of us aware we were standing on the edge of something that couldn't be taken back once we crossed it. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Jen. The hospital crisis was resolved faster than she'd expected. She'd be home in 20 minutes. Reality came crashing back. I jerked away from David's touch like I'd been burned. Stood up so fast I almost knocked over my wine glass. Grabbed my purse with shaking hands while David sat there watching me, his expression unreadable. I stammered something about needing to leave, about having an early morning, about anything that would give me an excuse to run. And David didn't try to stop me, just watched me gather my things with that same intense focus. But as I reached the door, he said my name, just my name, Catherine, said in a way that made me stop and turn around even though I knew I shouldn't. And he said that what just happened was real, that I could pretend it wasn't, could run away and never acknowledge it, could go back to my carefully controlled life and bury this feeling like I'd been burying feelings for years. But that wouldn't make it not real, wouldn't make the awakening not have happened. That some part of me had just woken up after a very long sleep, and now that it was awake, it wasn't going to go back to sleep just because I wanted it to. I left without responding, got in my car and drove home in a daze. My whole body still buzzing from a touch that had lasted maybe 30 seconds. And David was right. What had happened was real, undeniable. I could feel it in every cell of my body. This awakening I hadn't asked for and didn't want, but couldn't ignore. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. A door had been opened that I'd kept locked for so long I'd forgotten it existed, and I had no idea how to close it again. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of carefully avoiding being alone with David. 3 months of group dinners where I'm hyper aware of his presence, but careful never to make direct eye contact for too long. 3 months of lying awake at night, replaying that moment over and over, my body remembering the feeling of his touch even as my mind tried to convince me it didn't mean anything. 3 months of feeling like a stranger in my own skin because I'm not sure who I am anymore. The careful, controlled Catherine I've been for so long? Or the woman who responded to David's touch with such intensity it scared me? The responsible friend who would never betray Jen? Or the woman who sat frozen on that couch, not pulling away, not stopping something that never should have started? I see Jen regularly. She has no idea anything happened. No idea her husband crossed a line with me. No idea that every time the three of us are in the same room now, there's a tension so thick I can barely breathe through it. She talks about David the way she always has, casually and affectionately, completely secure in their marriage, completely trusting of both of us. And that trust makes me feel sick with guilt, because even though nothing physical really happened, even though it was just a touch and some words and a moment that didn't go further, I know I've betrayed her. By responding the way I did, by not immediately shutting it down, by lying awake at night thinking about her husband's hand on my face and wondering what would have happened if Jen hadn't texted when she did. That's betrayal. Maybe not in the legal sense, not in the way that would hold up in court, but in every way that matters to friendship, to loyalty, to the bonds that are supposed to be sacred between women. And the worst part is that I can't make the feelings stop. Can't go back to seeing David as just Jen's husband. Can't unsee the part of myself he awakened. I've tried. God knows I've tried. I threw myself into work, started dating again with renewed determination, did everything I could to distract myself from this awakening I never asked for. But nothing works. The men I date feel bland now, safe and boring and completely incapable of making me feel a fraction of what I felt during those few minutes with David. The life I'd built feels like a costume I'm wearing rather than a life I'm living. The careful control I'd been so proud of feels like a prison now that I know what it's like to feel free from it, even for a moment. I know what you're probably thinking, that I'm a terrible friend, that I should tell Jen what happened and let her decide what to do with her marriage, that I'm being selfish by keeping this secret. And you're probably right, about all of it. I am being selfish. I am being a terrible friend. But I'm also 40 years old and trying to understand who I am now that I've discovered there are parts of me I never knew existed, parts that want things I'm not supposed to want, parts that respond to intensity and danger, and the thrill of crossing lines. I've spent 3 months trying to figure out what to do with this awakening, whether to confess everything to Jen and deal with the fallout, whether to confront David and demand that we pretend nothing happened. Whether to walk away from both of them and start over somewhere new, where I don't have to carry this secret. But the truth is, none of those options solve the real problem. Because the real problem isn't David or Jen or what happened that night. The real problem is that I've spent most of my adult life suppressing parts of myself because they felt too dangerous, too messy, too likely to lead to disaster. And now that those parts have been awakened, I don't know how to integrate them into the person I've been. Don't know how to be both the responsible friend and the woman who wants things she shouldn't want. Don't know how to honor my loyalty to Jen while also honoring this newly awakened part of myself that refuses to go back to sleep. My therapist, who I started seeing 2 months ago specifically to deal with this crisis, says this is actually a good thing. That many women spend their whole lives suppressing their desires and their authentic selves, and that an awakening like this, however it came about, is an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to become more fully myself rather than the carefully edited version I've been presenting to the world. She says the guilt I'm feeling about Jen is valid and important to honor, but that it shouldn't prevent me from doing the deeper work of understanding who I really am and what I really need. That I can be loyal to my friend and still acknowledge that something in me has changed, that sitting with discomfort and complexity is part of being a mature adult. And, intellectually, I understand what she's saying. I do. But emotionally, I'm still drowning in guilt and confusion, and this awakened desire that has nowhere to go. Because even if I do the therapeutic work, even if I integrate these newly discovered parts of myself, even if I become more authentic and whole and whatever other words my therapist uses, None of that changes the fact that the catalyst for this awakening was my best friend's husband. That the person who saw me and touched me and woke something up inside me is someone I can never pursue. Someone who belongs to the woman I love, like a sister. I haven't been alone with David since that night. And I won't be. Whatever he awakened in me, whatever he saw that I'd been hiding, it doesn't matter. Because pursuing it would destroy Jen. And despite everything, despite the awakening and the confusion and the wanting that won't go away, I love Jen too much to do that to her. So I'm left in this impossible space, carrying an awakening I never asked for, knowing there are parts of me that exist and want and need and refuse to be buried again, but having no idea what to do with those parts. No idea how to honor them without causing devastation. Sometimes I wonder if David thinks about that night the way I do, if he lies awake replaying it, if he notices the tension when we're in the same room now, if he regrets crossing that line, or if he feels justified in showing me something about myself I'd been hiding. We've never spoken about it. In 3 months, we've never had another private conversation, never acknowledged what happened. We exist in this strange dance of avoidance and hyper-awareness, both of us knowing something changed, but neither of us willing to name it in front of Jen, and Jen remains blissfully unaware, secure in her marriage and her friendship, trusting both of us completely, making plans for the 3 of us to spend time together, talking about trips we should take, completely oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her life has cracks neither she nor anyone else can see. That's what guilt feels like at 40. Not the dramatic guilt of youth where everything is heightened and emotional, but a quiet, persistent ache that colors everything, that makes you question yourself constantly, that turns you into someone you don't quite recognize. I don't have a resolution to offer you. No neat ending where I make the right choice and everything works out. Because life isn't neat, and some awakenings can't be undone, even when you wish they could be. Some lines, once crossed, leave marks that never fully fade. All I know is that my best friend's husband crossed a line 3 months ago, and in doing so, he awakened something in me that had been sleeping for so long I'd forgotten it existed. Something that wants and needs and refuses to go back to sleep, no matter how hard I try to bury it. And I'm still trying to figure out how to live with that awakening, how to be the loyal friend while also being the authentic woman, how to honor what I've discovered about myself while also honoring the relationships that matter, how to move forward when every path feels like betrayal of something or someone important. At 40, I thought I knew who I was, thought I had myself figured out, thought the hard work of becoming was behind me. But it turns out you're never done becoming. Never done discovering parts of yourself you didn't know existed. Never done wrestling with desires and needs and complicated feelings that don't fit neatly into the life you've built. My best friend's husband crossed the line, and it awakened something in me. Something I'm still trying to understand. Something I'm still trying to figure out what to do with. Something that's changed me in ways I can't undo, even if I wanted to. And I honestly don't know if that awakening was a gift or a curse. Don't know if I'm grateful or resentful that David showed me parts of myself I'd been hiding. Don't know if the woman I'm becoming is better or worse than the woman I was. I just know I'm different now, awake now, unable to go back to sleep, and I'm doing my best to figure out how to live in this awakened state without destroying everything and everyone I love. That's all any of us can do, I suppose. Wake up, deal with what we find, try not to cause too much damage in the process. Even when the awakening comes from the most complicated possible source, even when there's no clear path forward, even when every choice feels impossible, we wake up, we stay awake, and we figure it out, one impossible day at a time. The end.